Ladies and gentlemen, this is internet personality Vangelus, and the Hobbylink Japan warehouse was only able to add a label to this Titanic Toys personal shipping container. The gigantic piece of action within is Gigantic Action Scorponok, a licensed third-party Transformers figure designed by Sentinel. The box is pretty damn simple, and the inner packaging is designed for function rather than display. None of this was made to be reused or anything. It's a simple meat and potatoes whack of twist ties, cardboard, styrofoam, and plastic, made to get the toy into your home and little else. This is a Scorponok made to stand toe-to-toe with the original Fortress Maximus, making him 20 to 22 inches tall, depending on what you consider the top of the measurement to be. His head, his horns, the big thing on his back. It's important to lay this out up front because it ties into nearly everything you're going to see from this point onwards. This guy's a minor aesthetic mix, with his proportions going for a bit of an anime look, while his surface detail draws a lot of inspiration from the original G1 Scorponok figure. The result manages a pretty good balance in my opinion. There aren't any giant flat surfaces or swathes of distracting over-greeblage. The colors are pretty on target with clean and strong paint applications, some of which burst to life, like anything touched up in silver ink. And I dig how much work went into representing things like the oft-forgotten gun turrets on the backs of Scorponok's legs, or the folded-up scorpion tail on his backpack. He's even got some turbine detailing on the soles of his feet, making me envision some legitimate jet boosters down there to help him get some lift on his city-sized limbs. The head sculpt is an interesting affair, fitting a comic book and anime shape while generally trying to evoke the imagery of the vaguely doofy head of the G1 toy. The end result is kinda weird, though decently defined. The tiny face of the original headmaster is expanded into a fuller silver head under a bone-colored protective mask, which is then under a form-fitting gray helmet. I think it ends up hitting a good balance between all intended aesthetics, using some sharp and crazy angles in its implied line art to cut a fine face for the ascended Nebulan criminal. It helps that the coloration is ridiculously strong, from the definition between tones to the intense glare of Scorponok's crimson optics. Also, the clear visor can be easily popped on or off depending on your own personal tastes. There's no hinging, unfortunately, but it tabs in quite snugly when it's plugged into place. Scorponok's packing a pair of familiar accessories at the Gigantic Action scale. They are loaded with toyetic callbacks to the G1 Headmaster, from the two-toned gray and orange of his gun to the big hinge-like detailings of his shield. However, they are both single-piece toolings, albeit large enough to look like a pistol and buckler in the hands of your average adult human. There's also a bit of a trick to attaching the gun. It plugs into Scorponok's palm via a mushroom peg that requires a bit of technique and a bit of raw muscle to shove into place. It works a lot like a Glyos vinyl modular peg, and may well be a lot easier to insert with a bit of gentle hairdryer heating beforehand. I was kind of impatient, and couldn't find my hairdryer. As for the shield, it's a lot simpler, just pegging into a slightly differently shaped hole for extra friction. Both accessories hold in just fine, totally add some extra toyetic flair, and also can be easily left to one side if you don't like them. Speaking of things toyetic though, I'm pretty bummed that Fast Track isn't here to finish off the accessory count. Aside from the obvious notion that I want to see as much bang for my triple-digit buck on a piece like this, I'd have loved to see Sentinel's take on a poseable and stylized action figure of that easily forgotten little guy. I mean, once you clear the $400 price point, I think an extra $30 to $50 for an additional little action figure would be quite palatable to those who are already making the dip. Design bullet point number 1 was be as big as G1 Fort Max, but design bullet point number 2 was be poseable. Is this guy poseable? Well, his head can turn left and right, so he's succeeding there. Even with the visor in place, this works. Unfortunately, it is just a swivel, and that noise is going to play into something I'm going to talk about in a bit. That other noise was me getting a text message, 'cause I'm popular. Moving over to his arms. His shoulders, well actually let's talk about his cannons for a second. These things are all just mushroom pegged in, so they swivel left and right. They are not ball jointed, it is just a simple left-right axis, but since they're, all diagonal and stuff, it can have a couple different looks depending on how you orient them. Anyway, his shoulder, it is a simple forward and back joint, and as you can see, the joint is smooth and tight. It can hold the weight of his arm super easy, and it moves super easy. His arm is now in the way of the light. As for outward motion, there's a separate hinge up here, and this is again smooth, tight, like silky smooth, but like glue stick tight. It's a lovely double shoulder joint setup, and the upper joint here, you can see it's a bit higher set up than the one down here. I think that looks fine, but just be aware of that. He's got a bicep swivel as well. It's, again, smooth and tight. Key words here, ladies and gentlemen. Now, as for his elbow, it is a double-jointed elbow, and that is not one of the elbow joints, but there are two joints. There's one here, and then there's another joint set back here, kind of internal to the arm. Like, this is how far that internal joint bends. And then if you don't bend that joint, this is how far the external joint bends. So in unison, they allow for a pretty decent arm curl. So he's all flexing and stuff. And I think that turned out pretty well. Now, his claws are palm up. That thing I don't like. And I've been curious about this ever since I saw photos of this guy. Does he have a wrist swivel? He does not. But he has a thing that works kind of like it. Because he's got this big, again, smooth and tight joint for his thumb. So he can grip things in his claws. If you want him to look like he's not gorilla arm palm up, this is on a swivel. So this thing swivels, you put this down, now he looks like he's got like a Ninja Turtle hand. Like he's got a regular hand, it's got a big claw thumb, and it's got two fingers. I think this works, and this is kind of clever. This is that little touch of Sentinel ingenuity I was looking for, because this allows him to have a normal-looking hand with a normal-looking elbow without compromising whatever else is going on in here. And given that the thumb joint goes all the way up to basically bumping into the no man's land between this area and that elbow joint, I think this works. Otherwise, a wrist joint, I think, would have either screwed with the aesthetics here, or it would have prevented this thumb from having such a wide range of, like, opening and closing, so he can, like, literally grip a child's head, and, like, here's my hand. You know what, let's shake hands. Hey, buddy, how you doing? So his arms turned out pretty well, I think. There's only one bummer, is if he's holding his gun, like he's doing over here, this arm can't really get around the fact that it's kind of a curling arm, like a curling iron gorilla arm, because if you swivel this thing around, unless you move his thumb like all the way out of the way, like back here where it looks unnatural, that's where you can start to get the gun to point forward with his, everything looking normal in line with the elbow. And that just starts stressing and bending the peg the gun is connected by, so when he's holding his rifle, unfortunately, he's got to have that dumb elbow setup. Whatever. I don't think of Scorponok as a guy holding a gun very often, and I'm probably going to end up taking this thing off of him when I put him into a proper display. As for his hips, let's talk about his waist for a second. It's a big, simple swivel joint. Again, smooth and tight. You have to wrestle with it a bit at first, and once you warm it up a bit, it actually starts running even smoother. Heat can be an element here because of a thing we're going to talk about very soon. His hips have got, basically the hip joint is very identical. I don't know if it's completely identical, but it's very similar to the shoulder joint up there. So there's one disc swivel for going forward, and this is kind of interesting. He can kick his leg all the way up here, and like with his leg sticking all the way out, it's able to like, that hip joint is holding up the weight of this entire leg so that it's not sinking back down very easily. That's pretty impressive. And there's also an outward hinge here. He's currently kicking his own arm, but if I get this up out of the way, it's not full splits range because of the sculpt on his thigh, but it's still pretty decent. Down here we got a thigh swivel. Very simple thing. It's much like his bicep swivel. It works. His knee is similarly double jointed to his elbow, except it's a bit more obvious when you're doing it. And so there's this thing getting revealed here. And as you bend the knee, this thing can go, like, super tight. Like, he can literally, like, kneel. Like, here's how tight that knee bend is. Let me get his arm out of the way. See that? Like, that's, I think, pretty cool. Especially for how bulky this guy's legs are. His knee joint is friggin' fantastic. His ankles, too, are ball-jointed somewhere deep up in here, because, like, there's this enormous, like, there's all this sculpted detail that gets revealed as you start swiveling the things around. I'm pretty sure it's a ball joint, because it seems like a very rotational sort of movement. There's a pretty impressive amount of tilt. There's also a minor amount of forward and backward tilt, but the side-to-side tilt's the really important thing. So, like all the other joints too, that is a very stiff, smooth, silky, glue stick style joint. Now this whole big guy here, the whole way that his articulation is working, the whole way that the toy is working and not collapsing in on itself, not crumbling under its own weight is because, while the joints, like all the major joint components, the hips and the shoulders especially, like these big load-bearing hinges, are all solid, what I believe to be ABS plastic. A lot of the bigger parts of him, like his chest, parts of his arms, and especially up here is where I noticed it, because I noticed the flex while I was moving his head around. The platform of the top of this gray part where his head's mounted had a bit of bend going on to it. I'm very sure that a lot of this guy is not only rotocast, but possibly even rotocast vinyl. Because it's got that little bit of squish that I recognize from Glyos vinyl. Immediately, I'm sure, several people are charging the comments section to scream at Sentinel for making an expensive toy this large out of rotocast vinyl. I think this was a good decision, because this thing is still the weight of a baby. And if this thing was made of die-cast and solid ABS, not only would it have cost even more money to ship, I think it would have been under threat of collapsing under its own weight. I think that the material here is the last bit of the equation of what makes the engineering on this a little bit clever, is that design intent number 1 was be big, design intent number 2 was be poseable, and have this chunky aesthetic. I think that to pull this off, going for a rotocast material that has this crisp a finish and that can still have paintwork as shiny and nice as the stuff on his chest or on his face, it seems like Sentinel figured out a material that could function for all of their design intents. Like, I'm saying it's rotocast, possibly vinyl. I don't know if it's vinyl for sure, but it definitely is rotocast. Like, I can hear the hollowness when I knock on him. I don't think this is a downfall. I think this is part of what makes this guy work. It's also going to be inexcusable to some of you guys, and all I could say is, if you ever get the chance to hold this thing, you'll understand. He does not feel hollow, he does not feel lightweight, he certainly does not feel cheap. His materials feel really well done, his paintwork and his sculpt is crisp, and the presentation of this piece is fantastic. It is simply the case that I think it's a reality that this guy had to be made of some kind of mass-hiding material just for the sake of what it's trying to accomplish. Also, as for durability, this is a $400, $500 toy, and partly because, like, a lot of this is cast in color and a rotocast of a very durable material, this guy can take it. Like, that probably popped the mic real hardcore. I don't know how to... Like, if I throw him, he's gonna just take this down, because this guy weighs approximately as much as I do. So, I think the best thing I can do here... I don't want to drop test him, because I think these things might snap off. These feel like they're made of actual ABS, and they're mushroom pegged in. Best I can do, I guess, is shake him. And put him down. He feels good. I can punch him a bunch. Ow! I can punch... Ow! Okay, I can, like, take his shield piece, which is super rotocast, and hit him a bunch. Like, yeah, I don't know. This thing feels like a tank. Like, this feels... Honestly, if it wasn't so expensive, it feels like the kind of toy you could give to a little kid and everything would be fine. I suspect the price must have to do in part with a production run being very small, because I want to be able to recommend this to people to even give to their kids if you leave these big pointy bits off. But, you know, it's cost prohibitive in that case. Anyway, just to close this up, let's... Yeah, there he goes. He's taking it all with him. Okay. Come back. I hope I've demonstrated the point I wanted to make, which is that despite being rotocast, despite having, you know, a material that could be very off-putting in description, this thing feels high-end and feels like built for survival. And I'll say one more time, he's got metal screws in him, and a lot of his joints feel like they're made of a super dense, super solid ABS plastic, and the interplay between the materials leads to fantastic, smooth, tight joints that, like, the joint is so solid, but the materials around it are flexible and gripping to it, so that everything works in this beautiful tandem. I'm really impressed by the posability on this guy as far as its engineering. If I had any qualms, I wish there was some kind of forward-backward ab movement, like a crunch, or I wish that his head could look up and down. I think that's a minor design oversight. I don't think it was impossible, especially to have his head look up and down up here. But that aside, the way they did the hands, and just the construction, I am gonna give him just a hearty pat in the back, man. You did well. Let's go get some dinner. There is a key design intent of this figure which informs just about every other thing that it does. Materials, articulation design, everything about Gigantic Action Scorponok stems from the root declaration of make him as big as Fort Max and Poseable. The use of rotocasting and, I think, durable vinyl components allows this enormous thing to hold up under its own weight, while, again, I think ABS components throughout most of its posability make use of that lessened density to make for a much less frustrating articulation experience. In the scope of doing what it set out to do, I think Gigantic Action Scorponok more or less succeeds. Definitely not flawlessly, as the neck and waist really could have used an additional axis of movement, and some kind of fast-track representation would have been the icing on top of what is otherwise a tasty but limited palette cupcake. A gigantic purple and green cupcake, albeit. I'm not going to tell you whether or not you should buy this toy because at its extreme price point, I really hope you're making decisions on those kind of expenditures on your own. What I'll tell you is that it's a playable and durable piece in the most pleasantly surprising ways, suitably impressive to look at in both stature and the fit and finish of its sculpting and paintwork, and very much a design centerpiece to any collection. I won't deny that the price tag and lack of transformation are a fairly indefensible pair of roadblocks for a lot of people. I suspect that its huge cost comes in part from a low production run, and I have a theory that its lack of transformation comes at least in part from the limitations of the official license that's allowed its release under the recognition of the Transformers brand. I'll probably never know for certain, but in the context of the figure that it set out to be, I think it's a very niche and eccentric piece that any Transformers fan should at least get a chance to see in person. Anyway, this has been Internet Personality Vangelus, and I hope this video has helped provide some information on what the hell a Gigantic Action Scorponok even is. And hey, there's a Black Zarak version too. If anything, it'll be a lot less self-destructive than the GPS-laden G1 original. In fact, if it's built like this thing, you could probably just club a G1 with the Gigantic Action Black Zarak and watch it explode into a fine and inhalable dust that'll rot out bits of the inside of your brain, and I'm actually not supposed to share any of this with the public. We're gonna call this video for now.